You're driving home. A car swerves into your lane. For half a second, you brace for impact and something strange happens. Your childhood kitchen appears in your mind. Your mother's voice. A birthday cake you haven't thought about in 20 years. All of it in less time than it takes to blink. People call this your life flashing before your eyes, but the real answer is far stranger. This isn't a metaphor. It's a documented psychological phenomenon with a name, the Panoramic Life Review, and scientists have been trying to explain it for over a century. The first serious study came from an unlikely source. In 1892, a Swiss geologist named Albert Heim fell while climbing in the Alps. He survived. And in the terrifying seconds of his fall, he experienced something so vivid he spent years afterward interviewing other survivors of falls, avalanches, and near drownings. Nearly all of them described the same thing. Time slowed down, their senses sharpened, and scenes from their past appeared before them, rapid, clear, and strangely peaceful. Heim published his findings and gave the experience its first scientific description. He called it a state of grace under mortal danger. For decades, his was the only real data anyone had. But why would a dying brain do this? Wouldn't panic make more sense than a highlight reel? For most of the 20th century, nobody had a good answer. The experience was filed away as folklore, something too strange for a laboratory to study. Then in 2013, a neuroscientist named Jim O'Borjigin at the University of Michigan found a clue in an unexpected place. Her team monitored the brains of rats during cardiac arrest. In the seconds after the heart stopped, they expected the brain to go quiet. Instead, they recorded a massive surge of electrical activity. Certain brainwave patterns, the same ones linked to heightened conscious awareness, spiked higher than they had during normal waking life. The dying brain wasn't shutting down. It was lighting up, and lighting up harder than it ever had while alive. That single study reframed how researchers thought about the whole experience. If the brain surges with activity as it loses oxygen, a flood of memory could be the result. Not a mystical event, but a biological one. A final, uncontrolled firing of everything the brain has stored. Here's where it gets specific. Your hippocampus is the part of your brain responsible for stitching memories together. Under normal conditions, it retrieves them one at a time, slowly, like flipping through a filing cabinet. But under extreme stress or oxygen deprivation, something changes. Neurons that would normally fire in sequence start firing all at once. Decades of stored memory can surface in a single burst. Your brain isn't showing you your life story for meaning. It's misfiring in a very specific, very human way. And the pattern of that misfire is remarkably consistent from person to person, which is exactly what made it possible to study in the first place. There's also a timing problem researchers had to solve. People who survive near-death experiences often insist the review felt like it lasted for minutes, even though the actual event took 2 or 3 seconds. How does a brain compress that much information into so little time? Neurologist Kevin Nelson at the University of Kentucky proposed an answer rooted in something more familiar than you'd expect: dreaming. Nelson studied REM sleep intrusion, a state where the brain slips into dreamlike processing while a person is still partly conscious. He found that people who report near-death experiences are far more likely to have brains prone to this kind of blending, brains that slip between waking and dreaming more easily than most. In other words, the same neural machinery that lets you live an entire dream story in the span of a few minutes of sleep may activate during moments of extreme danger. Your sense of time isn't lying to you. Your brain is just running on a different clock, the same clock it uses every single night without you noticing. And then there's the question of why the memories feel so emotionally loaded. Why your mother's voice and not your morning commute? Why a birthday cake and not the last email you sent? Psychiatrist Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia has spent over 4 decades collecting and studying these accounts, building one of the largest archives of near-death experiences in the world. Across thousands of cases, he found the memories that resurface aren't random. They cluster around moments of identity, relationships, and emotional significance. first loves, family, moments of failure and forgiveness. The brain, in its final seconds of processing, isn't pulling data at random. It's reaching for the memories that made you who you are, as if some deep, ancient part of it already knows what actually matters. There's one more piece to this puzzle, and it comes from the hospital rather than the mountainside. Physician Sam Parnia has spent years studying patients who were resuscitated after cardiac arrest, a period when the heart stops, and by most clinical definitions, a person is dead. In interviews conducted afterward, a striking number of survivors described the same panoramic review Heim documented among mountain climbers over 100 years earlier. Vivid scenes, compressed time, a strange, unshakable clarity. What makes Parnia's work different is the setting. These weren't people falling through open air with adrenaline flooding their system. They were lying still, monitored, their hearts not beating at all. And yet the brain, or whatever was left functioning of it, still ran the same program. That consistency across mountainsides and hospital beds, across falling bodies and motionless ones, is what convinced many researchers this wasn't a fluke of adrenaline. It was something closer to a built-in feature. Put those three findings together and a fuller picture emerges. A surge of electrical activity floods a stressed, oxygen-starved brain. The hippocampus fires memories out of order and all at once. A dreamlike state compresses those memories into a fraction of a second, while somehow still feeling expansive. And the memories that rise to the surface aren't random. They're the ones tied to who you are, the emotional core your brain has been protecting your entire life. None of this makes the experience less remarkable. If anything, it makes it more astonishing. Your brain, in the moment it may be dying, performs one of its most complex feats. Not survival instinct, not panic, not a supernatural gift, a kind of curation. A final review of everything that mattered, assembled by the same 3 pounds of tissue that has been quietly running your entire life without asking for credit. You've probably never come close enough to death to test this yourself, and that's a good thing. But you don't need a car crash or a fall from a cliff to notice a smaller version of it. Think about the last time you smelled something and were suddenly 9 years old again. Or heard 3 seconds of a song and remembered exactly where you were standing the first time you heard it. That's the same machinery, running at a much lower intensity without the emergency attached. Your brain is built to compress time and resurface identity in an instant. It just usually needs a much smaller trigger to do it. A scent, a sound, a familiar street corner at dusk. Which raises a quieter question, one worth sitting with. If your brain already knows, in its final seconds, exactly which memories matter most, what does that say about the ones you're making right now? The ones sitting in a folder somewhere, waiting for a moment like that to surface them? So the next time someone says their life flashed before their eyes, know what actually happened. Not a soul leaving the body, not a supernatural warning, a surge of electricity through a network built to remember you, doing its final job, at the exact moment it mattered most, reaching backward through every version of you it has ever kept, and handing you, all at once, the answer to who you really were.